All right, welcome everyone today to our talk on people strategy for early stage investors. Now, this talk is for investors, but investors often move into operator roles, and there are many founders who move into investor roles at some point in their career. So this content is investor focused, but it can be used to help different groups. And I'm very happy to have people from a variety of roles here today. And your first question might be, why are you giving this talk, Shannon? You came from a really mature company. You're an executive coach, an OD person. Don't you just help bigger or later stage companies? And the answer is yes, I help companies at all stages. But in my work, I see so many problems specifically that could have been solved when the company was 15 people rather than 500. And if these things were addressed earlier, it would have saved people a lot of suffering and frankly, time and money. Because it turns out it's really expensive to solve a problem when the company is shipping its 500-person org chart to increasingly dissatisfied customers, or it's beginning to see its growth slow down. It is much cheaper and faster to resolve the problem when the company is 11 people, and the challenge looks something like my CTO and head of engineering are arguing, and I don't know why. And this talk is specifically for investors and those in the community because I am one person working with so many companies, but you in your roles have an opportunity to influence many more companies through your work. And my hope is that you will take what is useful to you from this talk and share it with founders so they can get ahead of some of the more common people challenges we see at early stage companies. So my name is Shannon Mahon, and I left Google after 12 and a half years to start my company focused on helping leaders navigate people challenges, particularly at growth and late stage startups and founder-led companies. And so let's go ahead and get started. There are three things I'd like you to take away from this talk today. And the first is to do your due diligence on people, not just the technology. People risks are probably a much greater risk to your outcomes than you're currently accounting for, but they are addressable. Second is to share this information with your founders so that they can address these issues as they come up rather than avoid them, which is really common. And third, this talk is about people, and things can get complex fast. So I want to end this talk by offering, from my experience, suggestions for people-related processes that, if strengthened at early stage, would help set up companies for fewer bumps in the road as they approach growth stage. Let's begin by looking at the risks of people and team challenges to the outcomes of your investments. The biggest risk to your investment is not technical or financial or anything to do with the market. It's people who pose the greatest threat to successful outcomes of companies. This stat comes from a survey of 885 institutional VCs at 681 firms across the globe, and it ends with this very clear problem statement. Our sample VCs, particularly those investing in early stage deals, consider the management team as more important than business-related characteristics, both for deal selection and deal outcomes. And it's not even close in their estimation. Management team risks are by far considered the greatest risk to investment outcomes above the business model, industry conditions, market timing, technology, market conditions, boards, even things like luck, X factors like luck. So, but if you've been investing in early stage companies for a while, you might be thinking, as one repeat startup operator said when we talked about this stat, it's only 55%. I'm surprised it's not 98%. So getting the people stuff right is hard. You're facing this every day. And you might be seeing that hiring great talent isn't enough. Across the industry, we're seeing that even the strongest players struggle to win if they can't operate together effectively. And what you want to focus on and be known for is investing or leading a successful company. And it's not just about tech or the product. It's about being an effective leader through the development of those things, successfully navigating the terrain of what I would consider inevitable people-related challenges along the way. You're probably not currently assessing potential deals based on the founder's proficiency as a people leader, but most repeat founders, when they're interviewed about experiences that they learned, lessons they're taking from their first startups, they say that dialing in people and culture early is one of the top lessons learned from that first startup. So let's equip them from the beginning. I think it would be much better if new companies were failing because of the technology rather than the people. So let's, let's dive in. So founders can only navigate these challenges if they have the knowledge available to them. So when they encounter problems, they may come to you as an investor for advice, or perhaps they're not coming to you, but you can see challenges in your portcos and you don't know how to help. You want to see the companies you invest in succeed, but your position as a fiduciary makes it more difficult to know how to best help. And so I'm going to ask you to keep the following strategies, in mind so you can help founders move through these challenges faster when they come up. I've categorized several scenarios and suggested approaches by the problem type because the data and my own experience, and probably yours, tell us that you're likely to encounter 4 common problems in the earliest years of a startup. So my disclaimer for this is that these are mostly US-based early stage startups, the scenarios I'm going to share. They are almost all venture-backed, and the stories I share are based on real scenarios, but I've chosen examples that I've seen at more than 2 companies, and I've changed the details so that no story represents only a single startup. Let's start with a really common one, co-founder conflict. So when co-founders are working well together, it can be magic, right? But it can also break a company if it isn't working well. A couple of common scenarios we see. So my first example is from startups, that were started by friends. So friends who are working together on a project, they decide they have an idea for a company and they're really passionate about what they're building. And so they are excited. And so they decide to start a company together. They have the technical expertise to build the product. They have the networks to test and sell it. But over time, it became really clear that these friends did not want the same things. They didn't want to build the same type of company culture. They didn't want to pursue the same types of growth strategies. One was more invested than the other in doing more of the work, which resulted in resentment and caused a rift and eventually ended their friendship. So friends starting a company together can be amazing, can also go terribly wrong. A second scenario we see with co-founder conflict can be founders who are partnering with co-founders because they have complementary skill sets. So this might be someone who has an area of expertise, say in the industry or a product or the technology, and they're looking for someone with compatible skills to strengthen the overall offering. And so in one example, the founder formed a relationship with someone who had a track record of fundraising, and that was something that he didn't think he was very good at. But they didn't really ever trust each other, and they needed to hire a technical team quickly, but that very quickly created division, with one co-founder more closely aligning with the CTO rather than the other co-founder. So it was a very difficult situation. And so, but there are strategies and things that can help in both of these types of situations. So what can we do when we see these types of things? So the first is to ensure that co-founders are having roles and responsibilities conversations early and often. And I hesitate to start this talk with something so formal as roles and responsibilities, but what I don't mean here is let's have a really long and drawn out process that results in some kind of document that then we hold over each other, anytime anything comes up. I don't mean that it's something that has to drive the process of roles and responsibilities. What I really mean here is what I see often is people think that once they have settled, that they think that roles and responsibilities are settled once they've agreed to titles, but that's really just checking the box. And the absence of roles and responsibilities conversations at depth begins to show up when they have to start making decisions. And then it becomes clear who's responsible for this decision, this type of decision. How are we going to make decisions going forward? Even when it's friends, and so of course that might be true when you're partnering with a co-founder who's maybe a little less known to you, but friends starting a company together also have this experience. So just because you know someone personally doesn't mean that you understand what their strengths are professionally or their areas for development are professionally. So really making sure to spend that time on roles and responsibilities early is an important set of conversations for them to have. Not easy, but important. And the reason why it's important is because by the time communication fully breaks down, it's far too late. So paying attention to early warning signs can be helpful to you as an investor. Early warning signs of co-founder conflict might look like the co-founder is actually avoiding conflict, which is a bit counterintuitive. But what you might be looking for is what I might refer to as a missing conversation. So are there things that you're expecting the co-founders to talk about that they are not discussing, right? So are there decisions that aren't being made that you're expecting to be made? Are there conversations that they're avoiding because they're difficult to address? And a second early warning sign would be one of the co-founders having stakeholder conversations without the other. So this doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem, but what you're looking for here is there a change in the pattern here of who they're meeting with and kind of what the and are they both going together, or is one going without the other? And sometimes one going without the other can be the result of a really great R&R conversation, right? It can be a really good outcome. Okay, you're going to be the lead for this piece and lead these types of conversations. So again, it doesn't mean yes, there's definitely a problem. What you're looking for here is a change in the pattern. And then finally, if one does come to you as an investor about the other, my request is that you respect their relationship by pointing them back to each other. Okay, what do I mean by that? So if in a scenario where a co-founder comes to you and is talking about the other, I suggest that you begin with something like that's supportive, that's conveying that you're listening. Something like that sounds really difficult. Then after you say something supportive like that, then you can choose a question to ask. So sample questions you could use. What can I do to help? How do you want to raise this with your co-founder? Do you want me to talk through what a conversation might look like? What's most important to you in this situation? And where do you want things to be with your co-founder in 6 months or a year? So these are all questions that are helpful and supportive and directionally correct because it points them back to each other. And the other thing is that it really respects that the management of the relationship belongs with the co-founders. So it really keeps the accountability for that relationship between the co-founders rather than involving you. So that's why those questions can be helpful. And if you are a founder watching this talk who's currently facing co-founder conflict, you can also use these questions. You can use them directly. You can ask yourself, how do I want to raise this with my co-founder? What's important to me about this situation? What do I want things to look like in 6 months or a year? And it absolutely, I think it's great to have someone to talk to about these things. And my warning here would be to not discuss any of these things with anyone else in the company. So if you want to have this type of conversation or discuss conflicts that you're having with your co-founder, find someone who is outside of the company who you can have a safe and confidential conversation with. Do not discuss it with anyone in the company. That can be really damaging and destabilizing for the company culture. So that's my caveat there, but encourage you to use the questions in a safe way. All right, second, hiring. So many early stage companies struggle with hiring. Becoming an identifier of great talent is one part of the process of getting hiring right, and then cultivating that talent is the other half. There are very few people, in my opinion, who can do both exceptionally well. I have met a handful over the course of my career. And at the beginning, you're really going to want to hone that skill of identifying the right talent, but pretty quickly, you're going to want to look at an ability to cultivate that talent. and how to do that. So common scenarios I see where hiring can go wrong with early stage companies. I've seen people hire friends and people they know rather than strong candidates for the job. This is often a reflection of, like, the reason why this is problematic is because sometimes it's a shortcut for actually looking into what capabilities do we need in the role. And instead it's really anchoring on, this person's great to work with. And so, we will figure out, how to get them to, fulfill the role over time. So that's one area that I've seen hiring get a little tricky for people. And the second is pattern matching. So hiring people from big or established companies, and then those people end up not necessarily being a great fit because the person can't replicate their success. So sometimes people are bringing things from, bigger, more established and successful companies. They bring in some of those, processes and behaviors and approaches, but those aren't necessarily the right fit for, a particular startup. So these are two areas where I've seen hiring break down, and it's really frustrating for everyone. It's frustrating for the founder, it's frustrating for the person who's hired. It's really hard to undo, which is why repeat founders try to hone this skill quickly, because they know how important it is to get these hiring choices as correct as they can. Okay, so a couple of things that founders, that as an investor, you can encourage founders to do to strengthen their hiring capabilities. So one is to encourage founders to facilitate the development of their culture and to be opinionated early about their culture, hiring for the culture they want. And this is true, especially if they're hiring from bigger established companies, or even if they're hiring friends from big and established companies. Just because two people work together at another company doesn't mean that they took away from that experience the same understanding of what makes a great culture, or the same perspectives on what makes a successful company, the elements, the driving factors that drive the success of a company. So being opinionated about culture and intentional about the type of company founders want to build will help to drive what capabilities they will need and why. So really asking questions like, what type of person is going to be successful at your company, right? So really encouraging them to build that clarity out about what they the type of culture they want. Networks, YMMV, your mileage may vary. So networks can be great, but it really is up to the founder to establish fit, which should be a reflection of, the company's stage, the anticipated growth, and so therefore the skills that you'll need as the company grows, and the potential hires' capabilities and, attitudinal fit, right? Their approaches. So, sometimes I see founders struggle with referrals from either an investor or a member of their board because they don't want to put the relationship with the investor or the board member at risk. And so but if they sense that maybe a referral isn't a great fit, sometimes they will override their own instincts about that. And that typically does not go well. So a couple of things that you can do as an investor to increase the chances of success that you're going to make a really great referral. So one is to make sure that you are asking those questions about culture and capabilities. So, so really digging into those types of questions so that you can make a really strong referral. So really understanding what they need in that key role. And then the second is to make sure that when you are sharing that referral, that name or those names, that you are making sure that you're conveying that you respect the founder's position of choice and encouraging them to hire according to their own standards, right? So, I think this person is great. You should absolutely spend time with them, right? But, you are the person who's going to be, engaging with this person day over day and having them help you to build this company, right? And so the match between you and that person is really critical, right? So encouraging to them and respecting their position of choice around that hire. The third strategy is to yourself as an investor, but also encouraging your founders to get comfortable asking uncomfortable questions. So the best talent identifiers and cultivators I've seen are looking for a particular set of key qualities in those hires. And in order to discover those qualities, they have to ask some uncomfortable questions, right? And they really dig in to understand people. And that doesn't mean that they make the people who are being interviewed uncomfortable. It just means that they're, really making sure that they understand and engage. It's not a check the box interview. It is a real inquiry into how the other person operates. So these great talent identifiers and cultivators, people who do both exceptionally well, are looking for humility, coachability, and curiosity. So some questions you can ask, because you can ask questions that will get to these types of qualities. So for humility, you'll want to ask questions about teamwork, team challenges, how they solved problems together, right? So you really want to understand, how did this person operate in the context of other people? And again, ask follow-up questions here, right? Where you see that, oh, the team struggled, ask some questions about how that person experienced that, what they were thinking, about that, what they thought of that challenge, how they addressed it, what were the different strategies that they, considered before choosing how to engage and resolve that. So that's the piece around humility, some questions around humility. And coachability is the second piece. So coachability, you can ask questions about how they handle mistakes or feedback. And again, this is where you're going to want to ask, follow-up questions about, how they, interpreted that feedback and what they did about it, when mistakes happened, how they managed that, over time, and how they managed not just the problem, but also the relationships, right? So coachability being that second quality. And then third is curiosity. So curiosity, you can ask questions about, when they've learned something totally on their own, by choice, that you could ask follow-up questions on that topic around kind of what was frustrating, what kept you engaged. The nice thing about this is that typically people will learn things totally by choice on their own because they're, passionate about them in some way. And so that's a really nice way to get a sense of how somebody speaks about things that they love and they care about. So really, this can be a really nice kind of set of questions about curiosity that will show you how that quality is, active in that person's life. And these questions may sound like very fundamental questions, and they are, and people oftentimes either don't ask them, or they don't ask them with the intention of finding, of really determining these or assessing these qualities. But it is really important to get right. Robust hiring process is good for everyone, and it's good to practice getting it right from the beginning. So as a founder, you're leading by example. And at later stage companies, what I see is that the cost of hiring of the wrong fit candidates is massive. And every time it happens, it diminishes the leadership team's reputation when employees see you bringing the wrong people in. So it's worth it to practice getting this right early, and discovering kind of your own areas to grow and strengthen this process. So encouraging, as investors, encouraging great, practices around this, and these other strategies as well. Trouble prioritizing. Our third area is trouble prioritizing. So hiring troubles are frustrating for the founder and the new hire. Trouble prioritizing is a pain point for founders, investors, the entire community. I hear about trouble prioritizing from all of these groups. Everyone is frustrated when there's a prioritization issue happening. But trouble prioritizing is not necessarily about knowing how to order things. Sometimes, and so I've seen it break down in a few different ways. So the first case is setting up versus doing. Sometimes we see a lot of activity without any output, and so there can be a lot of organization around the thing versus doing the thing. And so that is one thing that you may see as an investor. The second is around shifting strategies. And of course, you're expecting lots of strategy pivots for early stage companies as they pursue market fit. But what I mean here is kind of frenetic shifting. What I mean is shifting without rationale, shifting before there's real opportunity to see if a strategy, to validate if a strategy is working or not, right? So that can be an issue. And the third area I see is around too many or too few goals. And when I first started, this was surprising to me, but now I just realized that there can be that this is what it's always either too many or too few. And I think that this is an issue around kind of right sizing goals for a company. So sometimes I'll see too few goals or no goals. There will be founders who believe they don't need any goals at all. They're going to stay very closely aligned with their team, and therefore they don't need goals. Goals are a big company thing, and they don't need those now. On the other side, I see too many goals. So it can be, the company can be very small, 6 to 15 people, and they have, 50 OKRs. And sometimes, it becomes really frustrating. And that situation is frustrating for everyone because, what am I supposed to prioritize across 50 OKRs? And this can be really challenging and a real problem. Like it can be a real pain point for founders, because from founders' perspective, what I hear is we have spent all of this time designing OKRs, drafting them, rewriting them, aligning on them. We've spent hours of time as a company coming together around these OKRs, and I don't understand. Quarter over quarter, OKRs keep slipping and they keep slipping, and I don't understand why. And then you look at the OKRs and you see there are so many that it is impossible to understand what the priorities are, right? So, and I think that in this case of too many or too few goals, I think that it can be a function of the founder either wanting to lead a company in a way that's more consistent with successful later stage companies, right? So these are the practices of successful companies, so therefore that's what we'll do, or a rejection of those practices, which can sometimes result in an overcorrection. Because the challenge of, too few goals or zero goals, especially, can be one where, certainly an early team can remain tightly aligned and the founder or co-founders can keep a really good eye and manage the progress of the team. Once you get over 15 employees, it becomes much harder to just keep track of the day-to-day work of everyone and to see how everyone's progressing to those. So without goals, so obviously as you get to growth stage, you absolutely need goals. And the challenge is if you're trying to institute goals that late in the game, you already have an approach, a mindset, a belief that goals aren't valuable that is baked into the company's culture. And so that resistance will continue to show up even at later stages, even when those things are necessary, because people will look back and remember how successful the company was when they had no goals and it was so easy because they were all really aligned, and people will be chasing that kind of alignment that is just not replicable, when you're hundreds of people versus, when you're 5 or 6. So that's those are some of the common scenarios I see there. And there's helpful strategies that we can use to address this, particularly as an investor, some things that you can do since you are not, responsible for the day-to-day prioritization that's happening within your portcos. So the first is to be curious and encouraging. And I start with this one because I talk to so many investors who express frustration about this. And so, but leading with frustration isn't necessarily the best way to find yourself in a position to successfully advise a founder through this type of issue. So in order to really discover what's going on, leading with curiosity and encouraging them back to the kind of core things that they need to be doing can be helpful. So if you can, find a way to lean into curiosity versus the frustration. And the second is to advise on the opportunity set. So as investors, you're in a great position to do this. The reason why I list this as a helpful strategy is because sometimes what I see on the part of founders is there can be a sense of overwhelm in the face of the opportunity set. And sometimes they just need to have a conversation about where they really fit in the larger ecosystem. And again, as an investor, you are in a prime position to have this type of conversation. And it doesn't even have to be about that specific company. It can be as simple as a conversation of, let's just, get together and talk about the market overall. Let's talk about the landscape overall and where things are at and what's changed recently. And hopefully this can be, you'll have this conversation in a way that kind of, elevates the founder or the co-founders, out of the day-to-day kind of onslaught of things that have to be done, and elevating them more to that strategic place so that they can, again, reground on what's important to them and how they want to get there. So that's a second strategy. And third, this is tied to something that I see sometimes where people will say they're having trouble prioritizing, but then when you ask follow-up questions, what they really mean is that they're noticing that the team's progress is slowing and they're unsure why. And so this is an opportunity. So if you're seeing something like that, where it's not like strategies all clear, right? So if it's something where productivity is slowing, you can ask some questions that can help a founder move through this type of challenge, by beginning by discussing goals, just making sure everybody's clear. There are goals. The goals are right-sized for the company's size and stage, right? So discussing goals, making sure those are right-sized for, the company's size and maturity, but also directionally correct in terms of the strategy that the company is pursuing. Then you can ask about process, like, how are things going in terms of, like, do people understand, how work is kind of moving through the organization and who they need to go to, right? Like making sure that, like, the processes are clear and, like, there isn't something about the development process that is getting in the way of that productivity. Once you've cleared those things, those kind of top level things out of the way, then you might begin to be curious about team dynamics. And is there something happening there around team dynamics, that something between people on the team that might be getting in the way? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that would be kind of your third area you might go to. Great. Our fourth area is making tough calls regarding people. This scenario is the most complex because there are so many different factors at play. And eventually it comes down to the dynamic between the relationship, the person's performance, and the company's strategy and goals. So sometimes I can see this come through. I notice this problem coming through when people are operating from a scarcity mindset. And that can sound like, I know this person is really toxic to our culture, and it's really damaging for people, but we can't launch the next thing without this person. It can also sound like, I know this person isn't performing to the standard that we need them to perform, but I'm concerned that we're going to lose people if this leader leaves. Or it might even sound something as simple as, like, I just don't know how we're going to manage this person's workload, even though I know the situation isn't good and I'm having to, like, give and give and give in order to, again, kind of close the gap between what this person is doing and what we actually need. So sometimes there's a scarcity mindset, and those are some examples of what you may hear that would indicate that that's happening. The second is around a founder not realizing that a company or role has outgrown an early hire, perhaps someone they have a personal relationship with. And this one can be really tricky, again, especially as they're moving through that early stage, moving toward that next raise, moving toward growth stage. This can be, those early teams, especially the ones who are successful really fast, bond together really quickly. And so it can create some blind spots across the group. And in some ways, that's I think a reflection of the kind of single-minded focus that they need to have to grow that quickly. But it's important to address these blind spots if you see them. And so here are some helpful strategies about how we can do that. So the first strategy is to support the founder in making the call. Oftentimes, in my conversations with founders, they know the call that needs to be made. So the best thing you can do as an investor is to support them in accepting what they know needs to happen, and then helping them navigate the effects of the decision, right? So you don't have to, you're not necessarily a coach. You don't need to, like, actually help them work through the phases of transition that they need to go through to accept this, but you can very practically help them to navigate the effects of whatever that call is. So that might mean something like strategizing how to help someone gracefully exit while protecting the personal relationship. It might mean finding someone, perhaps a coach, who can help them navigate their next growth area. Or it might mean helping a founder fill a talent gap in the wake of a departing person, right? So very kind of practical things that you can do to ease the transition and encourage someone to make a tough call. Even just saying like, I'm going to be there with you to help you navigate whatever's on the other side of this decision can be really helpful. But as an investor, you may not be able to do something about it. And as a founder, you may not have time to deal with it on your own. And so just as you would bring in a talent partner to hire a key role, consider bringing in, additional expertise to help navigate this, type of situation. So because it is important, not delaying these types of decisions can get in the way of really delivering on the vision of the company. And my second strategy here is to encourage you that there doesn't have to necessarily be a tough call to make for this to start showing up on your agenda, right? So you can include people as part of just looking at overall health of the company. So you can consider having routine conversations on people just as you check in on something that needs on other parts of the business, right? And so if this is just a standing part of your agenda, it can then just be included. It's much easier if it's already part of the agenda for these things to come up. If you already have a habit of demonstrating that you care about these things and that you're creating space to talk about them. So then, when something comes up that does need to be addressed, it's easier to dive in deeper with a founder because you already have that foundational practice. Great. So we've just discussed 4 common problems we see at early stage companies and some strategies for you as an investor to use and to encourage your founders to use to address those. So we've talked about co-founder conflict, hiring, trouble prioritizing, and making tough calls. But no matter what you're navigating with a founder, one of these challenges or something else entirely, remember the fundamentals. What do I mean by fundamentals? So the 2020 Netflix released a documentary called The Last Dance, which profiled NBA star Michael Jordan and the Bulls dynasty. This is just a great photo of people playing. This is not from the documentary. So in one episode, Michael Jordan talked about the importance of fundamentals, noting that when he felt his game slipping or when he just felt like he wasn't performing at his best on court, he would go back to the fundamentals. He would leave the game and he would go work with his trainer in practice on things like his footwork, his dribbling, his shooting, right? And he did that because he understood, and he says this in the documentary, that his overall performance was the cumulative effect of the strength of these individual areas. So by focusing on those individual pieces, he was able to strengthen the game overall. Your performance as an investor is similar, right? The relationships you develop with your founders are critical for your deal performance overall. So there are a few fundamentals to look at when you want to improve. So we started this talk by talking about how company performance is directly related to management team performance, that low performing management teams are a great risk to your deal outcomes. So management team performance is a function of the team's ability to listen and trust each other and to create a context in which they are operating and leading together. And they can only do that if there's a lot of listening and trust. As an investor, your ability to listen and trust increases the amount of influence you have in these situations. Trust actually can be broken down into 3 sub-skills: credibility, reliability, and sincerity. We're going to talk about that next. And then listening is really important because it's actually hearing what the other person is saying. Most of us, for so much of our lives, go through listening, but we're really just thinking about what it is we want to say next, right? So it's not true listening. So what I mean by listening is really effectively hearing the other person instead of letting our minds be occupied with what we think we're going to say next. a quick little look at trust, because I think that understanding the component parts of trust can help us to identify how we can increase trust with others. And it can be helpful to think about someone in your life. It doesn't have to be a person you don't trust, but if you think about a specific person as we go through this, it can be helpful to kind of land what I mean by each of these questions. So the first component of trust is reliability. So do I believe that the person will deliver consistently over time? Are they reliable? Reliability. Second is credibility. Does the person have the capacity and the capability to deliver what I'm asking them to deliver? Are they credible? Do I believe them, right? Are they credible? And then sincerity is, do I believe the person is sincere in where they are coming from? Does their internal conversation and my assessment of that, which of course we can never know what the person's internal conversation is, but do I sense a consistency between what is happening inside the person and how they're showing up externally, right? Are they sincere, right? And notice how all of these questions are assessments. They are not the truth. They're reflecting our experience of the person. And that's what makes this a really useful framework when you're trying to troubleshoot either why you might be losing trust in someone, or if you're trying to build trust with another person. These are really good areas to look at. You can ask these questions if you're trying to assess why am I experiencing diminishing trust in this person. On the other hand, if you're in a new relationship and you're trying to build trust, you can begin to ask yourself, what of these three areas might I need to demonstrate more to this person in order to increase trust in them? How might I shift how I'm showing up as a way to increase the amount of trust that's existing between us? Right. So working with companies at growth stage, I often see several areas that are frequently overlooked and in need of cleaning up. And these are people-related areas that, had they been addressed earlier, would have prevented some of what we consider growing pains of growth stage companies. So now that we've kind of walked through maybe what some current state stuff is, let's talk about how you think about elevating your companies for the next raise. So these 5 areas are the ones that I most commonly see. So the first is around compensation. I'm encouraging you to benchmark your compensation early, especially for cash compensation. So equity tends to be more dispersed until, later stages, but a strong point of view on cash compensation early will give you rationale for later compensation decisions, and it avoids inconsistency and hurt feelings later on. At its best, being opinionated about compensation is something that can be, a foundational piece of your culture and kind of how you approach it, because how you reward people is a key part of your culture. So think about compensation not as like a decision or a conversation to just get out of the way, but as something that can be a foundational piece of how you think about building culture. And benchmarking that early can be really helpful, can help you avoid later stage issues. Second is around performance systems. I am not suggesting here that you go out and, create some kind of massive performance, matrix or any kind of like overbearing system. Our goal here is to right size according to your company stage and where you are at. But some kind of performance system will help you as you get to Series B and beyond and have more complex performance issues come up. The reason you have more complex performance issues come up is because you're more than 15 people, you've differentiated roles, you aren't able to keep as close day-to-day eye on individual performance. And as you get, again, beyond that 15 people mark, what you begin to see is these performance issues come up, but there's no alignment across the leadership team about what good performance looks like. And so sometimes what I'm having to do with teams is we have to stop. We have to align around what good looks like before we can even deal with the situation at hand. So having alignment about what good looks like at your company in terms of performance early on can also be really helpful. Company-wide forums are a great place to practice consistent communication about the company's mission, vision, and goals. Ambiguity in communications about company direction is a top driver of employee disengagement, so it's worth it to practice getting this right as you scale, preparing your company for the inevitable pivots that will come with future growth. As a founder, or your founders, if you're an investor, they will be in a much better position to be able to kind of read the experience of how they're coming across when, again, the company is, 6, 8 people, than they will when it's 150 people and all of a sudden they realize they need an all hands, right? So, really get this right early, establish these forms of communication, and that will help prepare the company overall for those inevitable pivots. Ambiguity about roles is another top driver of disengagement. And again, at seed and Series A, this can often be actively managed by the founder or by the co-founder. So that's, very early, not a problem. But it does get significantly harder as we, again, get over that 15-person mark. And so in addition to ensuring that there are job descriptions in place for everyone as a way to reduce risk, that's very important. Please do that. Having clear roles will help early stage companies as they add functional leads, right? So what you're seeing is as people move to growth stage, they add those functional leads, which is wonderful. It's a great sign of growth. But it is when you're moving from a place of everybody doing everything together to, okay, now we have differentiation, we have functional leads, it can be hard for people to let go of some of the things that they were doing before, which makes it hard for new people to step into the roles they've been hired to step into. And it can really be, a struggle for people. And I really, it's painful every time I see it because it's so avoidable if only there was more clarity around roles and acceptance that role differentiation is a beautiful sign of growth. So clear roles will support everyone in stepping into those new roles. And it also provides clarity for everyone else in the company about who to go to for what. So, and that accelerates the company, everyone in the company's productivity if they know who to go to for what. So finally, decision making, and again, I don't mean having some kind of formal, thing for every small decision that the company is going to make. But in key strategic decision areas, having some kind of documented process can go a long way in demonstrating company maturity and a readiness to scale that doesn't rely on a single person. So, and this can also, once there's that alignment across the leadership team, it again conveys a clarity across the organization and across the rest of the company so that they understand who they need to go to for decisions. So who they need to involve and then who's ultimately going to make the decision. And again, this is about increasing the pace and the ability of the company to move. And I encourage you to not just check the box on these things, get into discussions about them. Encourage your founders to be in discussion about these areas so that everyone can be sure that you're building a solid foundation and to show that you're ready to scale and that you're ready to scale in an area that's so critical, your people. So among all the headwinds facing startups, you don't want the right product to fail because of the wrong team or unwillingness to grow as a leader, as an investor. You don't want to settle for a 2x return if you can have 10 with a very slight course correction early on. So I would love to see us get to a point where companies are failing because of the tech or the timing, not because of the people. And so my encouragement, my request is that we equip founders with the expertise to navigate these challenges as they encounter them, because I believe that we all deserve to find the right ideas, technologies, and new applications faster. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a real pleasure to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.